Hello, good day. So we are tasked to explain the PAS37, which is the provision, contingent liability, and contingent assets. So PAS37, this particular standard, we are talk about two items, which is the liability and the asset. So this is a mixed standard. When we say this is a standard, it does not pertain only the asset section or the liability section or the equity section. It talks about the both liability and assets. So as you can see, we can recognize or disclose contingent liability and contingent assets. So what is important in this particular standard? We need to draw the line in when can we say it is a provision and when can we say it is a contingent liability. And finally, we are to measure a contingent assets. So, let's start. But first, of course, let's define what is provision. Provision is an existing liability of uncertain timing or uncertain amount. So, here, take a look that in your provision, it is considered a liability. So, it means there is already a past event known as your obligating event, which now creates your liability. We should remember that one of the characteristics of liability is based on your past event and there is an outflow of your economic benefits. The main problem in a provision is the uncertainty, either as to timing or as to amount. Timing is when can you pay that liability, while uncertain to the amount you will pay on that liability. When we talk about obligating event, it can either a legal obligation arises from contracts, laws, and statute. And constructive obligation, so this constructive obligation is based on your different assumptions. The use of provision must be established for every separate obligating event. And then, when do we recognize a provision? So first, it must be in a present obligation. We already said that for it to become a present obligation, it must be based on the events. And that past events must create an obligating event. So next is we recognize it when it is probable. Take note that there is an uncertainty of timing and amount. Lastly, it is measurable. It is uncertainty as to the amount and still capable of being estimated. Let's remember that when two items is present, we have provisions. It is a probable but not measurable. It is contingency, and not probable but measurable, it is also a contingency. So let's proceed to the initial measurement. The following are the measurement techniques to measure provisions. We measure it based on estimates because again, we must be capable of being estimated. Example, your best estimate is 3 million. So 3 million is the answer. Next is we measure it by continuous range. Continuous range, there is a continuous range if ever may have a lower limit and upper limit amount. So for example, the liability will be 3 million to 8 million pesos. So there is a lower and upper limit. You will measure it with midpoint of the range. So you have 3 million plus 8 million and you will divide it by 2 million. So the midpoint is 5.5 million. Lastly, we measure it by large population of items. Large population of items, we can say it is a large population of items. We need to take a look into your different possible outcomes. You will measure this by statistical method or weighting. So, as part of your measurement is your reimbursement. What is reimbursement? So, naturally, provisions happen because of the future amount that you need to settle. Based on that, there can be reimbursement. So under this standard, it is provided that reimbursement must be recognized separately and you will not net it against the provision. So what is a recognition, or when do we recognize the asset of reimbursement? We only recognize if ever it is virtually certain. Take note, in provision, we recognize it only when it is probable. However, for reimbursement, we recognize it when virtually certain. Meaning, for that, it will really happen. Once you recognize your reimbursement, you can measure it. Next is the subsequent measurement. It is the measurement after recognition. The measurement we learned a while back is our initial measurement. It is the first time that you will measure the provision and then subsequently measure it, or known as subsequent measurement. In this measurement, we look whether the liability on the provision, the occurrence is greater than the non-occurrence. Either it is probable or not. So let's move on to the different types or some items specifically defined or discussed under PAS 37. First, you have your future operating losses. Under this is we do not recognize but we will measure it. There is no past event, so you can't have your provisions. So this means it cannot recognize and not measurable. Another one is onerous contract. Is a contract with a consideration in which, based on the consideration, you are bound to perform an obligation. So there is a contract. There is now an obligation. So what is the obligating event there is that the agreement. So how do we measure it? Since this is a contract and the agreement is to be performed in the future, so there is a contract and agreement. And the recognition is recognized and the measurement is least cost of exiting from the contract, the lower amount between the cost of fulfilling it and the compensation or penalty arising from failure to fulfill it. So let's proceed to the last specific, which is restructuring. When we say restructuring, there will be a change as to the performance and there will be a change as to the business operations. Like for example, you will restructure your business in Manila and you will transfer it to Cebu. So there will be now a change as to the operations of the business from Manila to Cebu. So when we'll recognize it, take note that there are three: future operating losses, the onerous contract, and this restructuring. For the future operating losses, it is not recognized, while for the onerous contract, it is recognized, and the same as the restructuring. Restructuring is recognized only when there is a formal plan to restructure, and we measure it by the direct cost. Let's move on to contingent liability. Contingent liability is a possible obligation or it is not probable. However, it cannot be measured. Take note that in provision, it is probable and measurable, while in contingent, it is probable but not measurable, or it is measurable but not probable. So, what are the rules on your provisions and contingent liability? So, here are the rules. For the likelihood, if it is probable and measurable, it is a provision and the treatment is accrue and disclose. When it is probable but not measurable, it is a contingent and the treatment is disclosed. If it is reasonably possible, either it is measurable or not, it is contingent and the treatment is disclosed. While if it is remote and either measurable or not, it is a contingent and the treatment is ignored. Another one is the gain contingencies. In gain contingencies, If it is virtually certain and measurable, it is a provision and the treatment is accrue and disclose. When it is virtually certain but not measurable, it is a contingent and the treatment is disclosed. When it is probable, either it is measurable or not, it is a contingent and the treatment is disclosed. If it is reasonably possible or remote and it is either measurable or not, it is a contingent and the treatment is ignored. So let's proceed to the last, which is the lost contingencies. There are 6 examples above, but we only answer number 1. So it states that in number 1, Dwayne Company's legal counsel is convinced that the likelihood or losing the case is probable. So it is probable daw. The potential amount of the loss is estimated. So it is probable and it is measurable because it is estimated to be 2,300,000. So yes, it is probable and yes, it is measurable. So it is a provision. And the treatment is accrue and disclose. So thank you, and that's all for the PAS 37 provisions, contingent liability, and contingent assets.